record on, and therefore engage this. We could engage this in a conversational manner, because this is certainly not a topic where I should just keep on talking. But first of all, I like your impressions. I mean, this topic of thinking about the practical projections of this didn't come out of nothing, but of course the earlier conversations around this. But because there is certainly a certain amount of will towards it, it might be good to talk about it fairly practically, not just what people want, but how it could happen. Like which things to pick, how could they be done, what would be the outcome for potentially at least the one to aspire to or work towards to. And like, I have some ideas, certainly, but maybe it's better that I just open the topic first. Like,
Yep. And by me.
First of all, do you think like it's a viable, fertile topic? That I have read the comments right from earlier meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not succeeding in starting the conversation.
All right. Yes. Let's. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We're.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. Let's do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's work there. Any first impressions on that? Anything
new? I was thinking, if Pekko, if you have some ideas that you thought we could be talking about, I guess there's already some that are like progressing, that have been progressing in the last weeks. But maybe it could be fun to, or like make sense to kind of open a doc and just list out, kind of keep a bit of protocol as we speak, to be able to go back to that.
Yes.
Yeah, let's definitely do that. Do we have a similar doc that we can continue to use, or?
One of the easiest way to do this would be to use the doc that we already have. That is the
registry.
Registry, yes, and
okay.
because then everybody has, I think, editing rights already to it, and we could make it at the bottom of it. Like, I've opened too many pages earlier, but
I mean,
tell me if you have an access to it. If you don't, I can open such a thing.
We could also say, because if we want to like have this as like a log or like, I don't know, some kind of thing, we can just put the link at the beginning of this document, so that, if we continue to use like some sort of log, this registry is not going to be like 600 pages, or like 100 pages or something.
Yeah, I think for now, if it kind of comes up as kind of recording thoughts from this conversation, if it grows to be something else, it can be always, cut and paste it to somewhere else. But this is a good way to get to this sort of practical start. So I made a line to set like a area.
All right.
Let's put that as log for now. Better titles, appreciate it.
Pekko, do you think you could share this, because I'm on mobile and I can't really look at my at the document, or I can work with the document while I'm
share it on the screen?
Yeah.
Yes, I think so. Yes. All right. So now it's shared.
Super.
And
thank you.
So that's at least a kind of raw material production tool.
Yeah.
but so that's set up. But any going back to the sort of impressions, first thoughts, since this is a good first thought, but more practical one or operative one. Like I said, I have some, but
yeah, if you have something in mind, I think we should go for that. My only concern would be in a very XORG fashion that we spiral down planning as a meta game, and we just do planning, which is not a terrible outcome. But I was thinking that maybe we can mix some of that planning, if that's what you have in mind, Pekko, and we can also maybe start working specifically on the definition of oxel that we've talked about as like a instruction that creates the definition of oxel in your mind through play. So that could be a way to balance the planning and the creation.
So yeah, in my mind was like we could also do that essentially, like that we just pick something and start doing it. That's a possibility. But it's also like, do we want to visit do we want to select which one we work on? And I have some like first of all, I quickly now jotted in here like some of these, let's say, perspectives where things could start to focus on. There's others and they can be added, but like these are at least a starting point. And one possibility is we choose one and start defining it, of course. But I also had like a general like thinking of strategy. Like one strategy could be for this session or generally forward, it would be for the more conceptual project-like things. One could even start by giving at least a couple, 2, 3 of them, like short sessions to put like a minimal version out, and then decide from there where to go. That's one possible strategy that came to my mind.
So I like from reading the intro to this to the call, I could definitely appreciate just a little bit more framing of what's going on. Are we selecting like these are different things, and then we're gonna like work on them for the rest of the call? Is that what's happening?
Well, this is up to discussion, but the point was that there was this interest towards like looking at practically how we could pick, roughly speaking, a project or projection and work on it. What would it practically entail? Like, would it happen in Friday sessions or in some other sessions? What would be the topic? And what would be the kind of projected outcome of that? And this is first a discussion on that. And then how do we decide to approach that? Like, do we even pick one topic and just go with that? I left them quite open intentionally in order that we can decide, that I don't decide it beforehand on how do we approach this.
And so just like to get clear on that, you mean, for example, things like defining or like kind of a bit developing what our thinking is around the cards, or what our thinking is around the oxes, or is it also this in this direction of like what's going on with the what we spoke about in terms of like a release, like how when to do that, how to practically do that, or what's happening with the website, or is that like is any of that in the scope of what you were now?
Yes, very much so. Like precisely like looking at, okay, there is some desire towards practically working towards some outcome. What would be a sensible way to pick a topic, because probably it's not working everything, and how to work upon it, and what we did the kind of projected outcome like for that.
Okay.
So maybe if I can quickly comment, like what has happened now, maybe that gives a bit of a entry door. Like, so now, like if we, for example, think about the website, there's everything that's been happening there is basically finger exercises, or like, you know, looking at one thing and seeing how it could function and la la la. So this is why we have been making these sandboxes. In terms of how that happened, because one of the questions that you also kind of wrote in the intro was like, what time would we use for that? Would that be a Friday session thing or so? The way in which that happened so far was that we were like with Pablo and then Leo a bit, and like with me in a kind of a bit asynchronous conversations, and everybody was trying a bit of stuff and everybody was looking a bit at how things happened. And I think like from my end, that felt rather nice because it was possible to kind of do stuff when there was space to do it. But I also think that it is good to come together and evaluate, because I think it needs all of us to push it. I mean, intellectually, particularly, like in, you know, conceptually and also kind of, you know, what does this kind of open when we do this? What does this open when we do that? So maybe the kind of putting things together is that could like that I have been experiencing is rather fun, that it went like a bit piecemeal and like conversations went a bit piecemeal. But I think it would be also great then to come together. And this I'm saying because what you just, if I got you well there, Benko, what I thought you suggested was that for each of the bits that we could now define as kind of being in a mode of being desired, which could go into the log, for example, that could be great, I think, to have a Friday session, compact, to talk about it, maybe to review what has been happening, speak about it, evaluate it, and then work with it, maybe again in an, you know, piecemeal asynchronous way.
Mm.
So that would just be kind of a first, you know, Einlassung, as we say in German, on the in response to your opening.
Yeah, I'll also put that like as a kind of proposal-ish thing, as like
Yes.
a Friday session on the website, and what's there and how could it develop.
Yes, and I think like what I could also imagine is that there would be like, as I understood that you were saying, there could just be a session on, for example, the cards. There could be a session on the oxes. There could be a session on maybe, I don't know, compacting together what happened on Jakob's side, or just so like the proposition was not specifically only for the website, but I think the format is nice to say that if we define now maybe as at the beginning of this log section there, so and so many things that we think could be good for us to work on, that a Friday session at some, you know, well-fitting moment in time, I think could be quite a nice format.
Yeah. So that's one thing, like as a possibility. And I think it's quite kind of potentially fertile to have a session which comes at a point, okay, what can the website do, and what kind of what's put there, what has been the process, but also like, okay, now that we have this, what could be done with it?
Yeah,
that's kind of what I put down. Couple of things from my side, like I think there are a few things that here that are, and there could be more that are more like really operated through XORG itself. This would be the Oxel and the card. Oxel, of course, like in a way, we have many organizational models as well from time past. Like I thought that if we bring them, one possibility is to bring them in the Oxel. They could also be brought separate. But for Oxel, I think, let's put it this way, I'll add, like, for me, and this is a proposal, but I put it in form of a challenge, defined as a game, which has been mentioned. But I do think in Oxel it's I think there is a pathway towards that, and it's sort of an interesting pathway that you're kind of bringing this way of defining organization, almost like more the verb than the noun. But that defining comes through the process of playing it. And that could be one possibility to take or uptake. And also, hello, Eva, and hopefully you have managed to pass your technical problems, Leo.
Yeah, I don't know. I just keep disconnecting for no reason, but we'll see if I can stick around.
Seems to be working now. So that's the Oxel. Whereas for card, I think there's also like there's two things. I think
at home, somewhere accessible. No. Also not in the basement. No. Ja, det er der ikke. Jamen, det kan jeg ikke.
That was interesting. And the so yeah, for the card, like I think one of the interesting possibilities about it too, I think that would be useful to shed some light on is this, like how to take not just a physical card and even physical card digitalized, but open the possibility of the structure of the card as a way to process meaning. Because I do think like that's one of the reasons why the card is an attractive, like culturally attractive structural paradigm.
Yeah, my brother was talking about how it'd be cool to have, because we were making the cards for the gardening. And so we just started with the blank cards, you know, and then we were just thinking about, well, how do we want to do whatever? I don't know, but like if we just had a manual like of different generative practices for like going from zero to organization using cards, I think that would be really sick. And that kind of thing, like it functions even without like the code, you know, it's like you just get people around a table and you're like, so what do we need? Like, how can we group up? What are the operations, right? What are the operations? Can we group these operations into particular roles? How does that grouping work, right? How do like whatever, like I don't know. But I think it'd be really cool like if we had like a little Zine like that. I don't know.
Could be like that could be a possibility. And also like I think nothing has to necessarily be one format, like something can be also in the web as well as a Zine. Of course, Zine can also be in the web.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean on that note too, like regarding like card stuff that I've been toying with, pretty soon I want to like publish to a GitHub, you know, so I'd love to try to figure out how to, and right now it's on the agency GitHub, but like only because we don't have another like organizational thing. So I would love to figure out how to, yeah, setting up a XORG GitHub possibly, if that's something we're interested in. Because I know like I'm interested in it insofar as like, yeah, like insofar as I want the card game code to be more closely associated with the identity of XORG. So I would like to have that GitHub in order to post this code.
Yeah, I put it actually now. I put it in the kind of website category, even though yes, it's not the same, but kind of like it could be a category of its own as well. But I was being practical. Also, what's Jakob's proposal particularly? Like,
he was talking about like putting the alliances together, so making it so that our website showed all these like alliances that were like connected to in like a network. Yeah.
Yeah. Does anybody remember details? Well, that's a possibility. What do you say?
Yeah, that he suggested having like this window into other websites, basically into other organizations, so they get a space in XORG's website, and we get a space in their website, sort of like minimum window into each other's, instead of having like a logo. Maybe it's a social experiment of sorts, or playing around with something, which I found really interesting. And I think alongside, for example, the AML, the ambiguity expression markup language, that kind of window could be like this this thing that we put out, right? Like, hey, we're using this for our own infrastructure, and here you go. It's one of our casts, let's say, as Martin expressed. And that could be really cool. Like, if you want to have XORG's window in your website, just add this link to an iframe and things will happen.
Yeah, I would also put it like a general challenge on that kind of word concept output, because many of the other things we've talked about, like getting grant money and so on, like it would be a big benefit for such if there was like, let's say one like yes, a website, but then one thing at least to put out. And secondly, like many of these things are, wouldn't say like low-hanging fruits, but let's say middle-hanging fruits at least to put out. Maybe there are even low-hanging fruits, but like fruits that could be picked with some work, so to speak, and then could be turned into see this thing we made for others.
I remember that kind of plastic claw that they sold in the supermarkets in Finland to pick up the lingonberries. That kind of hanging fruit.
Yes.
That level of fruitness.
Yeah.
Appreciated.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
the level of fruitness. Thank you for that.
Yes, level of fruitness. Yes, that is let's say measure. I know this is slightly flippant and more funny, but I'll add it nevertheless. Is one of the measures is level of fruitness, and I will say it now. If you promise not to look right now, and believe it later, but just look at industrial fruit pickers at some point
okay.
in life, and like see the weirdest technology, which is extremely money.
I'm like holding back from looking this up right now.
yeah. Because it's like the contrast between industrial scale, but it has to be very delicate, because otherwise you fuck up the fruits, right? So
interesting.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so it is an area where one can spend some time, but I do say like also maybe Eva. So we had some time for like in a way first impressions on this topic of what could we practically work on, like, and how should we do it. Do you have any things you would want to comment towards such a topic?
At the moment, not really. I think like what you said before, having something as a minimum viable game, or like just the smallest thing of a product. I don't necessarily like the word product, but like having something that can be shared and something we can work on and something that is more tangible is like, I think, the best idea for now.
Minimum viable game, I will also put that as a measure. Because
and
I
something
totally,
playful. Yeah,
yes,
something that is not static, something we can work with, something that we can mess around with, and like that is, yeah. And it's
I think that's right on point. I I believe we should, if it was up to me entirely, we should focus on the cards basically, because it just collapses a lot of our knowledge into a very straightforward output, that allows us to do many other things. Like once that database of cards is there and there's a simple way to access it, we can make games with it, ask for funds for it, use the slot thing you mentioned, Leo, of like creating an organization, also giving it to other organizations so they can use it. Like it's just there.
Yeah.
It's the
I mean,
lingonberries.
I think it's priority
And-
too, at least like, you know, I mean, at least as like a first game, I think card.
Yeah.
I think,
And
and the other point is what I think is also very important. Like I have the feeling that all of us are kind of keen on working on these cards. Like we are having fun with them, and like what is fun for us is like always much easier because like or at least I personally find the first step always the most difficult one. And if it's something that is super interesting to work on and fun and pleasant, then it will make it easier.
Mm.
Or
Yeah,
this is
totally
like
agree.
how I feel about it.
yeah, this is the I'm kind of vacillating between a couple of things, mostly because there's one tricky thing about cards, which is that as if you look at a card, say you pick a card from a deck, um, uh, the card itself is not yet a game, usually, or very rarely. Um, and and then like creating the card often creates this sort of, okay, what's the game around it question. So then you have to kind of make that. And so that's my I have a couple of questions on that. One I added now to the card part, which is like a card as a medium or minimal viable games. That is, maybe the game is something else than the card, but the card is developed as a medium to present the game. That's one possibility.
Yeah, I would lean towards that.
That's something to think about. And then in terms of the Oxel, like the whole thing is kind of large of largeness, like probably challenging amount of largeness. But I have this sort of like a trace or like a first steps on towards a landscape idea towards it, that if you kind of make it as like the first game as kind of almost like a not only a mental game, but kind of starting from that is that you, like even if you take this idea that you like take the idea like reading or text, and then you make this, which can be a card by the way, like a small like a change on how it functions, and then you think about how much it potentially changes. Like if you step into this game, every text in the world has changed. Like for me, it's like the one thing that entices me in that it's a very strong start. Like
You're
and of course,
shaking up the semioverse right there.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that start is also like it doesn't just stop there, because then you can say, what if you offer it to others and they join your game, and now you're all kind of changing all the text? Or what if somebody makes a new version of the way you kind of defined reading, and then that becomes a whole kind of parallel universe in a way, like in
Yeah, I really like that, honestly, because it just puts you right into that whole like transforming, you know, what things mean and
yeah
playing with meaning and stuff.
yeah.
So I think I lean towards that.
Some yeah, because maybe there is like a like said like these things quite naturally could live on cards, especially cards. Let's actually put our both spellings. Uh, Martin at one point reminded of this, and I kind of agree with him that the earlier spelling card in quotation marks is something at least to keep in mind. So like so yeah, like even if one doesn't get to the whole game, but one seeks an expression for that start, one can at that point evaluate, okay, like how much more this would need before it could be put out. But in itself, putting that out and a little bit more, like especially like opening some of the doors of possibilities around it, it shouldn't be too hard, I think, and it shouldn't be too time costly.
I think for yeah, to support that, it would be great, or I would feel greatly empowered if we had workflow that's kind of established on how to flesh out cards, basically.
Yes.
So that you can do it individually or collectively, asynchronously or synchronously. Yeah, whether that means I know there's like a database in GitHub with the cards, that could be an option, but that we just come up with a way of fleshing out these cards, that would be amazing. And then just that the database gets refined, and then we can in parallel work on the interface for that database.
Yes.
What's that?
Yeah.
Could I say, sorry.
You said.
Could I say something quickly to this? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it could help us in the spirit of practicality, to just toss into this conversation we're having now a few kind of possible material manifestations that each of us could see or is seeing at this moment about this, so that we can kind of form somewhat of a kind of consensus domain of what we think of and what we could potentially pursue as possible manifestations or materializations of the card. And if this doesn't sound like a shitty idea to begin with for somebody, then I could maybe say, look, what I think, what I'm hearing now, and what I could also kind of imagine from my end, that would be included in the process of kind of getting to a more shaped out formulation of the cards, would be to some extent writing of sorts, so a bit of conceptual work, a bit of a text frame. It could to some extent include the setup of a technical, so to speak, backend. And this is now a digital wording, and maybe it has to also be a digital wording, but one could also, of course, think that it's maybe only a paper backend, so to speak, like did we speak about something printing, be that now cards or be that a text. And then I think, and this is, I think, where there have been really, really interesting and important notes that have been made now over the whole time, the interaction then that would appear. And so, like, for me, adding, like, offering this as kind of my memory, so to speak, there is, well, minimally the part of creating cards, which in a digital interface could look, a certain way. But if it was a paper or PDF interface, it would look another way, because it would maybe be more like a manual style. And in a digital interface, it might really be a working thing. I'm, thinking of this drag and drop and adding a field here and there. So I'm not saying that any of these are things to pursue, but I just wanted to share that these are kind of some of the things that I think of when I think of us potentially developing the cards further. So that's what's in my mind. And just giving this to see maybe what's in your minds, so that we can make a space of what it is that we're looking at here.
Well, the one thing I would add, I'll be quick, I'll just say this. The one thing that it's missing is the design of the play. Like in a way, like you could say it's in the writing, but I would put it as its own.
It's what I meant with the interaction, I guess, more. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, you have
Yes.
interaction, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're talking about like several different like levels of or different like branches of development here. Like on the one hand, we're talking about like what is the like we're taking like starting from the current website moving forward. And then on the other hand, it's like starting from the data structure and then going trying to join the website. Because that's kind of like at least from the perspective of like how I'm trying to approach, and I want to really open this up also, like I'm really looking for help as well. Um, on the card data structure, how can that expand and eventually meet the website as something like, yeah, we're an interface to even be rendering these things. You could do something crazy with it, you know? Yeah, I don't know if that's, but yeah, I think one is like immediate needs of like website and then trying to like meet the data structure, and the other is like starting with the data structure and trying to meet the website.
One thing someone put their cards as a medium, and like yes, I couldn't agree more with that. But for me it also means like a medium is always the end, but also means to an end. And I think it would also make sense to think like this is why I like to describe the notion of like putting cards in how are they called again? The Yeah, you know what I mean, you see me. Like thinking about, okay, what does the media or what should the cards be doing, and like thinking about Martin, you mentioned like how does it work? Like, is there a physical form? Is there like only a technical something related to the website? I think thinking about the card itself a bit more before we also or maybe before we only start working on the content of the cards will make sense as well.
Yeah, that's also my kind of consideration is that one of the things like there's many frameworks that could be potentially put around them. Like let's say if one puts a framework of course a certain kind of play of card, but also like for cards, like I don't know if you others share this, but like this, the structural qualities they actually are in a very nerdy language somewhere in the beginning of this very document. It's now 21 pages. Um, yeah, the premises for the card, which is like these sort of qualities that I think are one of the main attractors for the card as a practical form, is that it has this sort of like it forms this interface between that there is an internal system and external system, and it kind of works as a bridge, but really a frame between them. And this opens a lot of possibilities. It's much more porous for systems. Like one way to look at it this is usually compare a card to a page. Now, page is a page in a book is in a system, but it's usually a fairly narrow systematic perspective. Like it's a page before one and after the other, and it's not normally. There are exceptions, but normally in this sort of sense that it would have like interactive possibilities beyond that. And I think that's one of the interest in this card, that in itself it's porous to be in a multiplicity of systems, which of course are often playful systems, but also in some ways modular, that it could move to other play systems. So if it's in one, it could be in another potentially. There's other reasons or other traits that for me like describe the sort of interest of a card, but those like if like it would be worthwhile to point to express those out as well, and that could be also informing or at least helping the cards themselves to be produced.
Yeah, I would like just quickly to say something to this. This is something that you pointed out, Pekka, I think quite powerfully after that moment where I had made the first card render. I don't know how long that is ago, relatively more or less soon after the Pioneer Week. And that's for me where I felt like I understood, or at least noticed somehow, that which I did there was not the thing necessarily for the cards, because I felt then that was very much focused on just giving them a graphical, putting them in a graphical form, but that minimally some interaction there was lost, but that was maybe because it was not insufficiently well done. But more like maybe that what Eva and now you, Pekka, are like also pointing at, that it's also a larger thing than just something that needs a manifestation in this particular way.
Mhm.
Like I think the scarecrow.
100%.
Yeah, no, I think this. So before, that's what I was also kind of now trying to like a bit gauge now. So before we think in code and database, it's more like almost like think as it of it in concept, and then like think, because I think the code and database are really one way to do something with it, but it's maybe a bit, maybe one can fall into a bit of a trap. I think I did. I don't know if that is a agreed opinion, but I felt that I did with the first thing. So that could be fun to kind of try and see how one can both do something that is visible, like shareable in that way, without falling into the trap of that's then the thing, and that's where it ends. That would be a pity, I think.
Yeah, I think I definitely feel what you're saying, and like that's a large part. I'm not saying I, haven't, I'm also falling in rabbit holes down all the time, like while I'm trying to approach the code, because it's like, oh, this works, right? Like a card is an object, it has properties and whatever, but it's not necessarily that, and so it's like at least things that have generally, I think, guided like a more generic approach is like looking at this as taking the concepts that we've had, like operations, application, um, like a transformation or a function, right? And really, I don't know, but like functional programming is, I think, I would say the closest conceptual thing linking between cards and functions, because we're just talking about composition, right? Composing cards, functional composition, right? But doing it inside of an object-oriented language where you can compose objects as functions, So that's just one thing. That's one thing I would say. Like there is and already exists, and I've encountered now, like going down the rabbit hole trying to make cards or whatever as like a thing. There's a lot of stuff out there that does do like a one-to-one mapping, like for different stuff. And I would love to explore.
One-to-one mapping. Do you have an example? I didn't get.
Yeah, so I mean, like when we were talking about like card, like we were talking about card combinators, right? Well, because in the beginning I was trying to do Haskell, and then I was like, well, fuck, I want to be able to manipulate these objects. But if you do functional programming in JavaScript, then you basically have like you basically are dealing with, oh, let me take this function and I want to compose it inside of that one. And then I want to take this part of the graph and put it inside of this one so that it interprets it this way. And so it's like, and so what I'm more and more finding is that what we're actually creating is a interface for functional programming using cards in JavaScript.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the more and more I find, it's like, it's real. When we talk about composition, that is function composition, right? When we talk about like, I mean, not necessarily exactly that, right? You can compose without like collapsing or whatever, but yeah, like, or generators, right? Generators in JavaScript are insane and they're super aligned with everything that we're talking about with cards. Card combinators, we were talking about that, and that's also a thing, like in terms of generators. I don't know. But like there are one-to-one mappings, and they are out there, and we just like, I don't know. I think I kind of took the conversation in a different direction in one too.
I think this is really interesting because when you talk about the cards, I see how your craft, the knowledge, the technical knowledge you have, influences the interface or like the outcome of how the cards exist in the world, how they manifest. When I think about the cards, I think of a much more pedestrian and basic thing that relates to my own craft. You know, it's like a client-based website. There's a database of cards. You draw them in a hand. You can have various ones, flip them, burn them, and that's it, right? That's one manifestation of the cards. But at the end, what the cards are is just the concepts we've been developing here. You know, the concept of the oxel and a description, the concept of semi-verse mining and a description. So I think we need to focus on that database of concepts that might just be a title and a description and some slots like the suits, and kind of that's it. And then we can have various different manifestations. We can have your manifestation of the cards where there's all of these nesting graph-like qualities. We can have a pedestrian manifestation of the cards where you just see them in a mobile website. We can print them to A3, A5 sizes and play with them. But I feel if we just flesh out these cards, this database of cards, and when I say database, I don't mean it in like a technical way. I just mean it a place where we can all see these distinct conceptual modules, basically, these cards. And then we can, try our best to flesh out some manifestations of them.
I say let's do both. I mean,
for sure,
yeah.
I think you're describing now the reason why I think it's very important to talk about the cards themselves, because like one aspect exactly is the concept, and the other part of it is the manifestation, and each of us has their own idea of the manifestation. And I think, or maybe I'm not, I don't know. No, sorry, Pekka, please go ahead.
No, to continue if you have like a, but I do agree with where you picked up. You can continue, but okay, I'll try to continue with harmony, or with your comment, like in a way, like this like for example, Pablo, I put your a sentence from, or a comment into the card part as a proposal, which was in the form of concepts of XORG expressed as cards. Like essentially this idea that maybe it's like the concepts in, the cards inform the concepts expression. The concepts are not nothing because they have had development, but they need more outward visible forms. So they can inform, they can develop the concept itself as how to express it, but also then they inform something of the card form. And in terms of the card form, I have to probably jump in this sharing to do a stop share and share again. But just as an example, I use an old image from a set, which was the places structure from Wonder Home. Now, this is a page, by the way, but it is a very card-like thing. And like I think in terms of design, there is a certain awareness even that it is designed card-like. So and one of the reasons is that this, like everything here is kind of structured. And while this is a particular place, there are many of these places, and they all follow the same framework, the card framework, kind of. So they remember, like tower is the title, but then there is a short description. A tower is a place that reaches high up the sky that so high up in the sky that it feels like it scrapes against the clouds. So not just a practical tower. But then there are moves. This place can always. Then there are features like two aesthetic elements, like things that are visible in a particular tower to create such a thing and to bring such a thing in existence. And one folklore, which is just the title of a story, which then has to be generated. But in this, like this card-like thing is summoning up through its structure in a particular way, which means that when other places are generated, they also generate in this particular way. And I do think like this, like just, I brought this to kind of also put this kind of a memento of like how the card is actually kind of generating its own play, and you can see the idea of how it plays in itself. And if we put that in collaboration with the concepts of XORG, that's, for example, one possibility. I'm not saying put this form, but put this kind of format approach, that the format considers how it plays and what it generates beyond its own definition. As a kind of leading or one of the leading thoughts. It might be interesting to bring into as a challenge of expression for XORG concepts.
But do you think, because what I find really interesting about the cards is that anything can be a card, like this could be a card. There's cards that are games in themselves and that spawn universes into existence. There's, I don't know, number 17 might also be a card, and that's it. You know, like they can have various degrees of complexity and expansiveness. And I personally would want to keep that variation in depth. But yeah, definitely having cards that are complete games is great, right? Or cards that are features of a game, and cards that are barely even anything at all, and they all coexist in this universe, kind of.
Yeah, I think like I don't think it goes in any manner of way that that the cards can be really anything. But then there is this trickiness, like I said earlier, that one card is usually not. It almost doesn't function like a card if there is no the system. Like even this is not a game in itself, although you could kind of play this because it has enough of a system. Like if we make 17 into an image, it could be a card, but that's not yet much. But if there are other cards with it, which might be numbers or images, and there is a kind of way to play them, then the cardiness of that 17 as a card becomes alive in a way. So, so it is this sort of tricky balancing between that there is always this sort of affinity to certain systematics internally and externally to the card itself, which is part of its power, but also makes it as a tricky medium because you're usually not just working with the thing itself, like the card itself.
I've always imagined that paired up with the cards, there's games to play with the cards, and maybe these games are carding themselves. I don't know, but that there is a list of different games you can play with our cards.
Yes.
So for example, if you have a database of our cards, let's say this is already fleshed out and you have it, you can play tarot with our cards and read them to someone, read someone's fortune with them. You can play, you can slot them into your existing organization. Let's say you want to hack your meetings. You work in a boring company. You bring the cards and you play them that way. And we have like a list of games that you use to activate the cards. Whereas if you would just read the cards, it would be like reading XORG's book of concepts. That's also fine, right? And maybe these games are also cards. I don't know. That gets super tricky. But I've always conceptualized them as parallel things. The cards as the units, and then the activities you activate those units with.
I don't know. I'm like, I think the games are cards, right? and
Yes.
yeah,
I guess.
and then there's like the game, I think, might be more of like a card structure, right? Of how cards relate to one another, right? Like instructions on how does like this role has a relationship to another card, and this relationship is blank, right? And that can tell you the structure of the organization, which is the game.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the distinct quality between the two is that one has this organizing principle over the cards. But of course, like if you buy a card game, very often the instructions for the game come in a card because they're already printing cards, right? I mean, that's kind of response to the production process. But you could very much just play that as a card in itself. So I guess games are cards as well.
Rules are
But they have
cards.
rules are cards. Everything can be a card because cards are cards. But having this relationship where you play the cards in a certain way activates them, right? And there should be multiple games. And once we have the cards and we start fleshing that out, we can start creating those games. An introduction game so people get used to the cards, a card creation game, organization hacking game, whatever. I don't know. You get what I mean.
Yeah, I think like I kind of agree with both of you, Pablo, in this, and I think one of the kind of fertile thoughts or operations is that you can treat anything as a card. You have a book, but what does it mean that you start treating that whole book as a card? It's certainly possible, and but with that comes this sort of idea that it's now modularly moving and its meaning is filtering to the other cards that are in play. But it's also kind of forming relations that are not just whatever, unless the rule is saying form whatever relation. But in most cases, it's like there's certain rules of play, and because they're kind of nesting structures, like every game is a card, but also it's possible to think that the card that set the game kind of contains in its nest all the other cards that are played with it. It's not so much I mean, it is a power relation, but it's not like a power relation in a static form. Like it can always be broken in itself. So, but I do think this sort of like to treat something as card, what does it entail? Is for me among the kind of larger thoughts that would be interesting to communicate alongside cards to open up this possibility of turning cultural media into playful forms, using the card as a bridge, or the idea of a card.
The idea of the playable concept.
Yeah, that was the parallel. We had a session that contained quite a bit on this. Like in a way, I see card as a form, as a form, as a parallel to concepts. That such a viewpoint is possible, but then it opens up this interesting possibilities. Like inherently, concept is working itself into chains by convention of text, but also speech. And whereas if it would be more behaving like a card, it's operating more in systems and networks and play with those systems and networks.
Yeah, it's a slight suggestion of playability.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and it's basically just a concept, totally.
The YouTube logo today is just a bunch of cards being shuffled around.
Holy shit.
Yeah. Treat your eyes to the art of cardistry, where hand-eye coordination and visual flourishes create mesmerizing performances.
Holy fuck.
Interesting. But I think in some ways, like there is a possibility to treat this, if we think of the MVP angle on this, like that we don't make it too large. Like one proposal is this sort of taking some of the, like roughly speaking, concepts of XORG, ideas of XORG, whatever, seeds of XORG, whether they are the semi-operas or whatever, like and then taking the challenge of expressing them by using the frame of the card as the expression, and then see where the card comes. Meanwhile, I think like expressing somehow the sort of like the approach to cards as like a general possibility of play, or kind of framing culture towards its play in a very general sense is a possibility, which is also, by the way, a bridge to Oxel, but that's a whole other thing for cardistry. So yeah, like it. So those two things, like that might be a practical project, like the working the XORG concepts, ideas, seeds, and challenging the expression of them by trying to put them in a card form, and then using that to inform what the card could be and should be, and then at the same time, like in a way, looking at this meta of cards. And of course, that might also come to a card form or other, but to use that to expand and enhance what happens around the cards, because that is important for their life and different forms of their life.
Jakob, you're holding your hand up. Was it?
Yeah. I'm not sure if you can hear me because I'm again in a hostile situation in terms of the Wi-Fi signals. I'm in a train.
We can
So I'm
hear
not
you.
sure if, yeah, okay, cool.
Actually,
sorry
very
for-
well, much better than the last time.
I think I have by default switched on the noise filtering or something like that. So I was yes, when I heard you speaking about the game is a card is a game, and that cards are games, that there was this kind of sense of uneasiness, and then I realized, oh, it's because I'm getting the word is, or that we are playing the is game, right? When we and when Beko when you started reformulating it as treating something as a card, then it highlights the affordances of the card concept, what it is actually doing, right? And also opening the question of what kind of nesting, because I think we are used to be thinking of nesting in the, at least me personally, in kind of the naive terms as like spheres within spheres within spheres. But the nesting can actually mean like different kinds of relations, like in hierarchical way or something like that.
Yeah.
And that it can useful to tease out the specific relations or patterns of that we speak about when we say nesting, because that can mean many things. So that were my thoughts.
Yeah, actually, towards that, I would say nesting is I would say even the primary organizer in relational networks. Like, or if you start from a relational paradigm, nesting becomes your primary organizer. And that's a nerdy comment, but
and mapping.
Yeah, but the mapping actually relies on nesting. Even like, but it's a big can of worms. But it actually kind of checks out, because it's more like when you talk about association. Association actually in a relational network is a form of nesting, and like we could work that out. But this is it's also when most of these kind of networks have possibility of generative nesting. That is, something new is produced inside something or in association with something else, and the behavior of such nesting is very different from the classical view of nesting itself. but yeah, it was definitely the is game that in a way, like game is a card means that we can operate the game through the structure of the card, and that can be fertile. I guess that's the longer sentence that can be put on that.
Mm-hmm.
I was
Yes.
I felt like sorry.
Yeah, I love that. And one more comment. So there was a talk from Dil Green yesterday around pattern languages for living economies. Okay, I think the Wi-Fi is bad now.
We can
No,
hear
it's good. We can hear you.
Is that the link?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, sorry, I didn't, because I was hearing Martin speak, so I didn't know whether the Wi-Fi is like lagging the signal. I didn't want to speak over.
We can
over
hear
you,
you.
so
Fine.
sorry. Yeah, okay, yeah. So I was just saying that Dil Green had the, there is already the recording at the link about pattern languages for living economies, and I really loved one. Or like I loved the whole talk. There were parts which I considered really enlightening, and one of the aspects was that he said that the function of pattern language, as he was learning it within the architecture first with Christopher Alexander, was to help chunk the complex system into the form that the very limited cognition can grasp, and be able to fluidly and fluently kind of zoom in, zoom out through the nestings of contexts, and actually get the, like, when Axel is speaking of economic imagination, so I realized that this is actually, or deal is as building up in a structured way situations. He was giving an example. So when he was doing some architecture tasks, when building the buildings and their surroundings, that he was like really able to feel, have the felt sense of how to organize some of the elements, because the intense practice of the pattern language allowed him to really get this like fluidity thinking and organizing, designing. So there is this slide where he says that I will find the quote because I think it's very compatible with XORG. And I think why I'm saying all this, I would love to discuss this at some point, and then perhaps see how it relates to XORG. But what's coming up from me, I will say the quote. Yeah, that it is. Okay. Yeah, anyways, I will send the screenshot into the chat or the quote. But it seemed that there is some shared overlap, but the cards concept is taking it a step further, or a few steps, and that it's intangible. Yeah, another dimension.
Yeah, it's more like the one thing I like about the card concept is that it has this insistence on the systems between, like which is even in the most conventional cards. Like if you get a playing card on the table, it has this sort of, call it, insistence or porousness to that. The thing is, yes, it's the card, it matters, but it's also why it matters is that there is this kind of constellation in between the cards, and cards have naturally that format, and that makes it interesting because compared to the traditional pattern, it also kind of emphasizes the network outside. This is why it has a network inside, but also a network outside, naturally, and it forms a frame between those. But yes, like, do send the quote because I do think it's fitting. There is certainly overlaps with pattern language.
Could I make a small comment on what I'm now hearing from all of us speaking about the cards? it appears as if almost everybody has a bit their own variant of it. I mean, a bit like what Pablo said earlier. And that's basically all I wanted to say. Like that seems really interesting. And you remember that we've been at that point of like this kind of material agnosticism, you know, of a certain concept, and I think maybe now there could be some exploration of this kind of idea of the card, or the concept of the card, or the structure of the card, in relation to its different ways of possible materialization, as a text, as a manual, as a kind of interactive website, as a functional programming. I don't know, those type of things. But I think there's kind of, yeah, I don't know how much more precisely to say this. There was another thing I wanted to just add, is that I feel there seems to be, maybe this relates very much with what I said before. There's this kind of understanding of the card, so to speak, like in its Platonic, in the Platonic idea. So it has a, we take it from a physical metaphor. So we have seen a card. That's the base metaphor that we take. So it's a thing that is cut out of something, and that's why it's kind of independent of something, of everything else, and it's very mobile. It is light, and so that makes a metaphor, and that would be what I would now call the Platonic idea of the card. And this is where what you just said, Mikko, comes from, that it has this kind of exterior structure, and then it also, because it's an object, has also an interior structure. And I think the second, so that would be one, this kind of Platonic, in scare quotes also, please, understanding of the card would be one understanding, and the other one would then be the understanding of a card that is more akin to the reading or the kind of cultural appearance of a playing card. So the first one would maybe be more close to what Pablo said, if number 17 can be a card, and I understand the point. And the second one is where you begin kind of working it toward, I don't know what's the good word then to say it. Like, I don't want to say performance, but like, you know, playability or so. But like, that is not to say that like the number 17 as a card that you draw would not be playable, because I think it also depends on the context in which you would draw it. Maybe 17 is just the thing that makes you, you know, that enables you to make a move in whatever situation you find it. I don't want to say either of those, but I just wanted to note that, as I thought that was an interesting kind of space between all those various renderings of what we, like, each of us can understand to be a card. Also in terms of how to develop this maybe forward, or like not even, like forward would be then exactly too simple, like wide ways, so to speak.
Yeah, actually towards that, like one check, I agree with you with this sort of, that it has interior structure and exterior structure, but I would even say that it has interior system or systemacy and exterior systemacy or openings, and like intentionally kind of emphasize the system part of it, which, yes, system is a structure and it's hard to, like, there are various definitions that strike difference between those two, but here it's more even emphasizing the system part. It makes it makes the card interesting. But the one thing, like I think, Martin, you're right in your, or at least that's my impression as well, that we have this different visions or different ways of looking at this, and one way to ground this, because it might kind of scatter to the winds from that, could be like, for example, make a like this. Well, I took this as a quote from Pablo, but I still think it's a good idea, is to take this concepts of XORG, concept ideas, seeds of XORG, whether it's any of them really, like from Semiaverse to the is game or whatever, and then take the challenge of expressing them as cards, and then see how that also informs the card form, like what kind of demands or asks it does for the card form.
Yes. Yes, I was just thinking, allow me please to add, and also please do take it as an addition to what you just said. That like one could, because I think like one could also ask the question, I start from the simple thing, one could also ask the question, if we do this or that thing, let's say we make something that happens on screen, or we make something that happens in a certain material, or we make something that happens in conversation, as now we've been mostly working. We could also then check, do those things work in a card way? So not, or in what way do they work in a card way? So we'll kind of ask the other way around at the same time. In maybe, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You muted yourself, Martin.
So there was an interruption. Do you see what I say, or what I try to say anyway?
I think I do, at least. I don't know. Yeah. What about others?
Yeah. Because maybe I'm saying this because I felt that like because it could give a check on whether what we do really has something to do with what we want to be doing, and not just looks like. Which was, I think, the mistake that happened when I made that first rendering. It looked like a card, but it left relatively little of the cardness of things, or like of itself being a card in existence.
Yeah, but I mean precisely that kind of question of what it could be. Like to take an example, I put a super practical one because I'm kind of working like from a grounding strategy, or trying to kind of produce something that could bring things together. So, for example, we looked at earlier, I think it was Leo, you that brought the facilitation deck, storytelling workshop, something, if you remember. It was in the group, Telegram group. And then I kind of got enough of the cards to figure out what the system is. And there was this really kind of one thing, like the cards were just usual facilitation techniques, but then in the front you had like on one side of the card you had like condensation, on the other side you had a little bit larger explanation. But then the key thing was that in the bottom of the card there was like where to go, to which card to go from this card. Even a kind of like well, you could go here if you're looking for this, or well, you could go here if you are looking for that. And then you had like one card on the side, which was kind of a flow chart. Like if you're in a concept stage, go to this color of cards. And if you're in I can't remember the stages, but anyway, another stage, you go to another color. And that was really kind of the only thing, but that already made it differently functional because what the card formed it, that it had this extra element. So this, for me, is like a practical example. If one starts to produce this, say, a card for a XORG concept idea, but then at some point somebody comes up with an idea of what could be in the card system part, and that could be then reflected to all the other cards made as a possibility. And there doesn't have to be one way, but this could be one way to find ways of enhancing these concepts, ideas, and seeds from the card form itself.
I think this is really crucial, that the cards can each individual card can be their own universe, but also certain sets of cards can have their own interacting rules, right? Like there can be some suit or set or deck of cards that has some rules that intertwine them together in a particular way, and then there can be another set of cards that have a completely different way of relating, right? So it's also I think we really have to bank or go full on the idea of the logic of all styles are within the table, right? Like cards can be of any kind of nature. There can be cards that are full games that have their own sets and logics. There can be cards that are more individual. There can be cards that are whatever, and we can experiment that way as long as we agree on like a minimum way of expressing cards, which is this database that I'm referring to. If we have, yeah, go ahead, Martin.
No, sorry, finish, please. Like,
I mean, just very simple example. We could have a Google Doc where each page is a card. That's it. Even that's limiting because it limits the text. I wouldn't want that. I think some cards should be all text in existence, and some cards should be one word. So I don't know, maybe each card is a text file and it has a header and content. It can have an image or not, it can, whatever. And then we can play with the logics of it. Some of them have suits, some of them belong to a deck, some of them don't, etc., etc., etc.
Actually, from here, I'll be quick with this. I'll let you, Martin, go. But now that I remember it, the one interesting challenge for us is to take the model that we've been using many times, including now with scores, which is this sort of basic elementary operative concepts towards the organization. That is the role, the scene, and so on and so forth, and make them into cards. And then precisely take this challenge of what the card can provide and them as a set of cards, what that can provide for how to understand them and how to play with them.
I'm not sure that I understood what you now meant to say there, Pekko.
So, like, meaning because like this is kind of still relating to this topic that if we take some of the concept seeds, ideas of XORG created in XORG and think about producing them as cards. One, and if that is a good grounding, I'm not saying that's the task we have to dive into, but it's a possibility. One area to pick could be this sort of the operative concepts that XORG has been using for a while, which is the like this sort of basic elements like seed and roll and so on, and scene and roll, and so forth, and setting, and produce them as cards.
What I was just wondering, kind of going maybe a bit beside you there, is whether that which seems to be appearing, or like which may be appearing, I'm not saying that it is, but maybe I see it so, that it could be, of this different understanding of cards, how, like, if what we want to be doing and what we also have been doing is to kind of find out what cards do or what they can be doing, wouldn't it be kind of down that intention also to just kind of make whatever anyone's imagination of cards would be, and then share that, and then just see, so what is the space that has been now opened? And you see what I'm saying?
I think I do.
I definitely would vibe with that.
Yeah, I think this is relates to my idea of we not only don't have to agree on the logic behind the cards, but it's good that we don't, because then more universes emerge from the possibility of cards, right? On the other hand, I totally agree with Pekko. That's exactly what I think we should do. Just turn the things we play with in our XORG sessions into cards. And to say cards is just to say that makes it accessible for others to play with it. That's the only thing. The only thing we need, that it becomes operational outside of XORG.
Yeah, I kind of, yeah, I agree with your, let's say, process, Martin. Like, and it might be good in the sense of mapping out a large crowd, and kind of very useful and fertile for that. But I think in addition to having just a large crowd, and it immediately becomes this question for an outside person receiving it, is what do I do with this? Like even saying everything can be a card is, in a way, not much. It suffers from the same problem of saying you can do everything, which is saying not much of anything.
You don't tell them anything. You just give them a card or a couple of, or a hand. Yeah. Seriously, I'm being absolutely serious here. Like the way to learn what cards are is just to draw cards and see 20 of them, and then you'll get an idea of what cards are, a particular one.
And what maybe my, sorry, could I just, what maybe my feeling is that as we speak, because I think we're being mega productive toward this kind of going to the outside, quote unquote thing. But what I think my feeling is that we're at this moment also working very much on how we understand cards. So maybe kind of doing that job, so, quote unquote, internally, could maybe make clearer what it is or how we could do something kind of, I don't want to say useful, but, something kind of connectable for somebody who's not in the call.
There's go ahead.
Okay. I have the feeling there's some honesty to it. If we just like open source what we are doing right now, like even including all like the struggle we have in this very moment of saying, okay, of defining what are the minimal characteristics of a card. Is it a title and an image? Is it just a card? Is it whatever? And like I have the impression, like instead of limiting ourselves and kind of coming up with some sort of an artificial definition of what we think it should be for now, but still having the openness to extend it at some point, which is, yeah, as you say right now, let's just reveal it and play with what we have, instead of coming up with something that is not yet necessarily, or that will be there at some point, but like just reflecting on the flexibility we try to implement at this point.
So just to be clear,
I'm not sure if this is understandable.
No, so I think it was to me, and I thought I understood it maybe, but like just to be clear here, I'm not saying, I wasn't meaning to be saying, I didn't think that we would be releasing this whole process or whatever we do. I mean, of course, these talks will be on YouTube, etc. But like, I didn't mean to say that. I was more thinking that maybe this is a process that we kind of, that is kind of a bit, how to say, simmering in everybody. So which would be great to kind of push through in one way or the other, and then share among us. And maybe something there gets clear that is then less, that has then maybe less of this kind of confusion of is it really now anything that we imagine? Or like, I just have a bit of the sense that like it might just end to a bit like, and lead to a bit more kind of a profiling for ourselves. And then we can still kind of say, okay, is it good to decide to make 5, to kind of open out 5 ideas of what we think cards can do? Or do we see that like some idea of it crystallizes that we think would be good to push out? But I think, yeah, it's more a process comment, I guess, that I'm
I think like definitely we could have such a process. Like
I think having a Discord or like going in that direction could help. Like I'm not even just talking about like a card Discord, but like being able to host or like create events for different directions of exploration. Because like, oftentimes like I definitely my mind is going back to like, how do I ground these concepts into code, right? But I also don't want to like talk about that the entire time, and like no one is, like I just don't want that to take up the space. But at the same time, I think that exploring this, even for like non-programmers, can really help like all of our conceptions, including like, and I would love, like, and I think it stands a lot to benefit from having all of these different perspectives on that stuff. But yeah, so I mean, I don't know, like maybe not even Discord, right? But like I just like having the ability to discuss these different trajectories, even asynchronously, but in a space where we can all do that would be awesome.
I agree with that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely we could have such a process, and like also as Martin describes, I kind of know where it ends up for me. I don't have a problem. What are the minimal elements of cards? Because I don't think such things exist from my point of view. It's rather that it's more defined by its behavior than certain content elements, and this is also an interesting quality in it. It's not that you can like visually see, materially see that what makes it a card in itself. Like this also comes to this point that if I think of it as a parallel structure, the concept. Well, concepts have actually as wide as possible range of appearance, and this is then something that they would have to trace. So I could put like from earlier examples, like I could put a street situation that you're in as a card, and actually have like in practical situations. Of course, it can work. Um, uh, uh, and actually, that's an interesting example because when you frame a situation, a life situation into a card, and maybe even put a title on it, that situation starts to behave differently. It starts to suggest this sort of modularity. It starts to suggest other cards and so on. And that's the power, really, that this sort of framing at. But the key thing I wanted to bring is also like because cards have this quality that they are not just material representations, but it's ultimately a question of how they play. Then like it also comes to this like even if we give people like all of these things can be cards, the prevailing question will be, okay, but how do I play them? Like in the very general sense of play. And I do think we should ultimately offer something on that end as well, because that's where the let's say the surprising meanings lie. The kind of where you're giving people something that they didn't have before, kind of thing.
I will need to hop off because my other part of the family arrived.
Yeah, we're I think finishing soon.
Yeah. Yeah, but I just wanted to thank you for this, and I thought it was great, and I think we kind of somehow worked a lot toward somebody kind of becoming a bit palpable of the cards now in this session, and I will listen to what you will be sharing in the coming minutes.
I think the last minutes could be used for thinking about the practical steps, which can be a session, can be a to-do, etc. Like that could be a good way to turn this from in a way illuminating conversation into the like how do we approach this
then because I have to run, I will make the first start on this. I was thinking that we have 3 formats that we know function well, I think. Correct me if I don't see that well in your eyes. Like, I think the one is the session itself. It's a precious thing we have. The second is the homework that has worked at some point. And the third would be these asynchronous stuffs that we do together. And then maybe we could add to that a moment where they could land in a session. But I think the way that I see this today, I thought it worked mega well to focus on the cards with a practical perspective for a session. So maybe that could be something that could then also be kind of taken for the OXE. It could maybe be taken for the website. It could be taken for other things. So
yeah, like the one possibility of a session, like if I take the thematic for still the card, is that everybody brings at least one example of a card. They can't bring many, of course, but to kind of replicate this idea of the process you had.
Yeah.
And that might be actually, I think, quite useful and also
I have
progressive, you say.
Yeah, a practical proposal is that there is already a card that we could all write down. what is the card for cards in your definition, so that we flesh out our individual ideas of what cards are. And then we can also work on more cards, like without first agreeing on a format. Let's just see what intuitively feels right to each person. And then we can have a session where we figure out what the minimum format is shared among those cards. And that's enough to just go forward, right?
I think, yeah, that's good. And we could kind of give the freedom. Your card, if you bring a card, it doesn't have to contain any text or anything, anything particular. But like one could take the suggestion of making a card for cards as a possibility, but you don't have to follow it. But everybody shares at least one card that they think is interesting in its cardness. And then we have a session of sharing where everyone tells why they picked this card and what are the kind of qualities they see on it. Because I can see the kind of crossover thinking that comes from that is kind of probably progressing things forward. And a kind of if that sounds fitting, that could be a continuation or a version reflection of the process that has been described here in the last 10 minutes or so.
Could be solid.
What about others? What do you think?
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I was also trying to just include the kind of freedom, but also everybody can take the challenge of making a card of cards. In addition, I will take to do, and everybody else can take to do homework, whatever you call it, that I will make some text for the early topic of the Oxel and this particular branchway, like first steps direction that we talked about in the beginning, or near the beginning. Just to have that, like said, nothing prevents the Oxel being expressed in the medium of cards. So that's a possibility, but I think that material might be also useful for future. And it's also useful, I'll say this as a practical point, because I don't know yet what, but there's been some additional talks on this, which I kind of framed for the savvy people as kind of imaginary organization. I was thinking really our approaches, but just wanted to put it in a form that is understandable for them. So there's been some additional talks that there is interest. There is not yet a set conventional money source, because none of the current cultural funds that they have is fitted for that, but there is interest towards that. And I think if that pathway progresses, there is this possibility for XORG to take part in the production of that game. And I think that precisely could have a kind of Oxel roots. That's one of the reasons why I was thinking of writing that in addition. But that can contain cards as well.
Sounds amazing. Imaginary funds for imaginary organizations is what we're getting, but maybe that changes.
Maybe that changes. That might change. All right. Any additions? We could even have the sharing of the cards next week, if you so wish.
That would be great if we manage. I
Is
will try.
Is it okay with everybody?
Yeah.
Yes. Also, let's write it into the chat in case Linda wants to participate.
Yeah,
she knows
definitely.
what we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. Let's add that description of it into the Telegram. All right, Jakob says yes. So, yeah, I think that's good concretization progress, probably illuminating. And with that, I will stop sharing and I will press stop recording.